Guano day, guano day, guano day, guano danhahi. Guanalia, guano danhahi. Guanalia, guano danhahi. Guanalia, guano day. Guanalia, guano day. Guanalia, guano da. Hey. Ego, igande. Ego, igana. Guanalia, guano danhahi. Guanalia, guano danhahi. Guanalia, guano day. Guanalia, guano day. Guanalia, guano da. Deyoka, 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 deyoka. Guanalia, guano danhahi. Guanalia, guano danhahi. Guanalia, guano day. Guanalia, guano day. Guanalia, guano da. Hey, hey, no. Daho.
Medolok diok. Nin gadalanan maltaya, weligiskok. Hello, welcome everybody to the Speak in Truth to Power evening. And I'd like to also take this time to welcome all of you to the unceded territory of the Ulnu, or as we know today, the Mi'kmaq, my ancestors, and thankfully to the ancestors who thought about us 7 generations ahead in the 1750s and early 1700s. They thought a lot about making sure we were able to continue to live our life as we had for 14,000 years on our lands, and signed the Peace and Friendship Treaty. And that is only a peace and friendship treaty where we never gave up our land, never gave up anything except for we agreed to have peace and friendship, which we continue to do to this day. And on behalf of the Mi'kmaq, the Ulnu, we'd like to welcome you to our land. Waladiok. And now I'd like to invite Teresa, Vice Provost of HRED. I said it wrong.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you, Kathy, for that amazing and warm Mi'kmaq welcome. I am Teresa Rajak-Talley, Dalhousie's Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion, and I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which was signed with the British Crown in 1726. As Dalhousie University strives to live up to these treaty relationships, we want to thank the elders and the guardians of this land. As Peace and Friendship Treaty beneficiaries, we have a responsibility to continuously educate ourselves of what this means and work in solidarity with Mi'kmaq and other Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. I am also proud and honored to acknowledge the histories, contributions, and legacies of the African Nova Scotian people and communities who have been here for over 400 years. As the host of this event, I am both privileged and humbled to welcome you to the 10th episode of our Speak Truth to Power Forum. The Speak Truth to Power team of volunteer women agreed that one episode each year will be used for Dalhousie University to recognize and honor women trailblazers and to adopt Women's History Month to do so. The 2022 Women's History theme focuses on providing healing, promoting hope. The idea is to pay tribute to the ceaseless work of caregivers and frontline workers during this ongoing pandemic, but to also recognize the thousands of ways that women of all cultures have provided both healing and hope through history. Globally, many brave and courageous Indigenous women are on the front lines, defending and fighting for Indigenous land and resource rights, in maintaining ecological balance, and in general, ensuring local food security for their families and communities. They are warriors and nurturers, protecting and ensuring life, and many, if not all, are activist leaders. Tonight, we celebrate the Indigenous women warriors and nurturers, leaders, chiefs, and elders here in the Maritimes. They are not alone, but are joined by other Indigenous leaders across the globe. For example, women such as Pratima Gurung, who is spearheading advocacy for Indigenous women with disabilities in Nepal and speaks of the needs for Indigenous women's meaningful participation at all levels. Ruka Sambolingi, who was elected the first woman Secretary General of the Indigenous Peoples Alliance of the Indonesian Archipelago, and who advocates for the recognition of Indigenous women's right to land use and management. Janice Appeals, a South African activist who's advocating and fighting for justice and reclaiming and securing land for farm workers, especially women farm workers. And then Naomi, a program officer for the Kenya Land Alliance, who is bringing to attention how resource extraction disproportionately affects rural women and leads to violence against women. Dear colleagues, friends, community, these are examples of just a few women among many. But despite the progressive work of so many, we know there's much more to do, especially given the world's current state of affairs, where violence, oppression, racism, and attempts of genocide persist. The women who we will hear from tonight and who we are honoring not only serve to inspire the next generation of Indigenous women leaders and role models, but they lend their voice to all of us to remain resilient and tenacious. This is an exceptionally important period for Canada's history in which Indigenous women, starting with the appointment of Mary Simon, an Inuk from northern Quebec as Canada's first Indigenous Governor-General, and Roseanne Archibald elected National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. The Indigenous women on our panel tonight join with these two national Indigenous women leaders in the midst of several important issues facing their communities, including how to end violence against Indigenous women and girls, and dealing with the discovery of hundreds of human remains on the grounds of former residential schools, among many other social ills. This event provides a platform for them to share their stories, their experiences, lessons learned, and lessons passed on. At the end of the event, we will officially thank them and honor them for their bravery, commitment, resilience, and contributions. But before I introduce our co-moderator for this afternoon, there are some housekeeping notes. First, we will be inviting our guest speakers to join in accordance with the program. Everyone's cameras and microphones have been turned off to ensure that only our guests are on the screen. Unfortunately, there's no chat feature, but you can post your questions in the Q&A. We did receive some questions prior. Because of time, we try to group the questions and may not be able to answer all. Thank you for understanding. This event is live streamed and recorded as an educational tool for future reference. For those who would like closed captioning, please press the CC button on your screen. This is different if you're using a cell phone. And lastly, as this is a virtual event, it is possible we may experience technical difficulties. We appreciate your patience if this may occur. Thank you and welcome. And now our co-host, Catherine Martin, who's Director for Indigenous Community Engagement at Dalhousie, will introduce our speaker and will help facilitate our Q&A. Catherine, thanks.
Okay, Walalan Sandales, our Vice Provost, and this was her vision to have this, and all of these panels have just been right on with issues of the day. It just seems to go well. Tonight, I am so proud to have gathered, and it's been difficult to find these leaders because they're so busy. One of them, in fact, Dr. Sherry Picto, is in New York at the United Nations gathering. So she's recorded for us and she's going to kick off the evening. I'd like to welcome Dr. Sherry Picto, even though it's virtual. I'd also like to welcome former Chief Candace Paul of St. Mary's First Nation in Fredericton, outside of Fredericton, Chief Andrea Paul of Pictou Landing, and grandmother Mika Mahan of the Wabanaki. So from there, I am going to read their bios. Their bios are online if you want to contact them or learn more about them. But first I'll start with Dr. Sherry Picto, who is a Mi'kmaq woman from Ilsetuk. Water cuts through high rocks known as Bear River First Nation, Nova Scotia. She is an assistant professor in the Faculties of Law and Management at Dalhousie University and holds a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Governance. Dr. Pictou is also a former chief for her community and the former co-chair of the World Forum on Fisher Peoples. She is a member of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES Task Force on Indigenous and Local Knowledge. More recently, she became the first female honorary district chief for the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. Her research interests include decolonizing treaty relations, social justice for Indigenous women, Indigenous women's role in food and lifeways, and gender roles in Indigenous governance. At this point, I'd like to welcome her and also mention that it's a very long interview that we did the other day, so you might be able to go online later and see the full interview. Our second speaker will be Chief Candace Paul of St. Mary's. She's a former chief. Candace Paul was elected as the first female chief of the St. Mary's First Nation on July 15th, 2004. She served 7 terms. Candace is a former employee of St. Mary's First Nation band where she worked for over 38 years. During that time, she held the position of band manager for 6 years, health director for 12 years, and a member of band council for 3 terms. She also worked with Indigenous Service Canada as manager of health partnership for 2 years. She has served on various committees and boards and was given the Chief Michael Augustine Award in 2006 in recognition of the extraordinary contributions she has made to improve the health of First Nation people in Atlantic First Nation communities. Chief Paul was a member of the Horizon Health Board of New Brunswick for 2 years. Candace sat on the National Chiefs Committee on Health, representing New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island for over 10 years. She also served on the National Women's Council for the Assembly of First Nations. She was the first female chief to be elected as co-chair of the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nation Chiefs Secretariat. She was awarded the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal. She's presently employed with the Wolastoqey Tribal Council on the NIHB Navigator, Program Coordinator. Chief Paul resides in St. Mary's First Nation with her partner Robert. She has 3 grown grandchildren and 7 grandchildren. Chief Andrea Paul will speak after, and she was born in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, and lived all her life in Pictou Landing First Nation. She's a descendant of a survivor of the Shubenacadie Residential School. Her father, Gun, attended the school, and her mother, Sundelace, or Teresa, were also from Pictou Landing First Nation. She's also my aunt, Teresa. Andrea is married to Darcy McGuinness and have 2 children, Lindsay and Selena. Andrea has a Bachelor of Education from St. FX and is currently in a Master's of Education in Leadership and Administration at St. FX. Andrea was re-elected for her 6th term as chief for her community. She holds the health and environment portfolios for the Assembly of Nova Scotia Chiefs and sits on numerous boards and committees. One of Chief Paul's notable political achievements would be the closure of Boat Harbor as a dumping site for pulp and paper effluent. Chief Paul has been instrumental in supporting the band with the growth in the community of Pictou Landing First Nation, such as a new admin building, a new fire hall, a new school, pavement of highway, installation of a sidewalk, housing, gaming, treaty defender, and financial accountability. As part of her work on Chief's committees, there are new developments such as the Atlantic First Nation Water Authority and Mi'kmaq Health and Wellness Authority. Apart from her professional work, Andrea loves to keep busy now that her girls are grown and moved out. Andrea and Darcy just recently closed their pub in New Glasgow called Shenanigans, which was operational for over 7 years. They are now going to be focusing on a takeout they opened called Auntie San's Takeout in the community of Pictou Landing First Nation. Andrea also opened a beading online shop, Wasawek Beading, which provides beading supplies and beadwork. Andrea is also a volunteer in her community and helps out as much as she can, whether it's hands-on or fundraising efforts. Andrea has no problems with public speaking and has participated in countless events as a keynote speaker at conferences such as Women Empowerment, Women in Business, environmental conferences, and presenting to university classes. Andrea definitely makes the most out of every day because tomorrow is not guaranteed. Finally, grandmother or Giju Mi'kmaq. Mi'kmaq is a Mi'kmaq grandmother. Her clan is Jugage from Eskinobadich. She is a mother to 3 wonderful adults and a grandmother to 4 beautiful little grandchildren. Mi'kmaq has devoted her life in cultural revitalization and in the rekindling of women's ceremonies, and more recently, the rematriation of her Mi'kmaq language. She holds a position as the elder in residence at St. Thomas University in Fredericton, New Brunswick, a role in which she provides support for Indigenous students and offers opportunities for the students and faculty to learn from Wabanaki elders and knowledge keepers. Mi'kmaq is also one of the 13-member Circle of Elders, Knowledge Keepers, and Clan Mothers at the Turtle Island Institute, a global Indigenous social innovation think and do tank, a teaching lodge supported in part by the Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience. She is a co-chair of the Wabanaki-Wesque, I had it all figured out, Wabanaki-Weskawak, Women of First Light, an Indigenous women-led initiative on adult education for racial social change. Mi'kmaq is a traditional sub-chief with the 7-district Gespigawig Mi'kmaq Tribal Council. Wow, I needed water for that. And obviously there's almost every woman in leadership and in running their households and extended family are as equally popular and have lots of hats And we were lucky to be able to bring in 4 of our shining stars tonight. So I'll start again, and I'll ask that we bring on Chief Sherry Picto. I want to ask you what inspired you.
Yeah, so we're talking about 20 years or so ago, even more. It was in the late 90s, well, even in the mid 90s, I did a stint as a counselor. And then later in the 90s, I sat on council for a few years with former Chief Frank Muse. And in the late 1990s, of course, that's when the Donald Marshall Jr. court case came down, upholding a 1760-61 treaty right to fish. And I don't think a lot of people realized what a turmoil of a time that was. Our whole communities were in turmoil. So we celebrated that day. Then, of course, we know what had happened in Burnt Church and other areas, and the same has happened here, and history repeated itself here just a couple of years ago. And so I think we were all pretty well burnt out. And my community was one of those communities who wouldn't sign the fishing agreements. And we never signed a food fishery agreement or a commercial fishery agreement. We just felt somehow in our hearts that that was watering down our treaty rights, or there just wasn't that confidence. So to make a long story short, it was amid this that I let my name stand. I think the former chief, though he ran, he was pretty well burnt out. In retrospect, we just kind of tried to help each other that time, and I did that. It's in that context that I ran for chief. And of course, I had a couple of really great mentors. My own grandmother, who was chief in the mid 70s, and she sat on council. My grandmother's name was Chief Leona Pictou. She was a Jeremy. And of course, Chief Rita Smith of Glooscap in the early 80s. Then, of course, in the last couple of years, I discovered that we had even an earlier chief. I knew about Chief Rachel Marshall in the late 60s till I think about 1971. And then, unbeknownst to many of us, there was Chief Mary Puro in Wattmacook. She was one of the first female chiefs in Nova Scotia, anyways, of 1962 to 64. Now, I just want to talk a bit about that, why this is so courageous. And I know there's a lot of talk about the Indian Act chiefs, and I myself have been critical of that system. And when we say the Indian Act chiefs, this is the only colonial way that we were allowed to vote for leadership in our communities, and it of course displaced our hereditary systems. And we do, I know the Grand Council is working on their traditional governance system, and we as women are trying to inform a lot of these processes. But I just want to go back to how brave it must have been for this Mary Puro. Indigenous women across Canada couldn't even vote in their own chief and council elections till 1951. We couldn't run for chief and councils until 1951. We didn't receive the right to vote even in federal elections till 1960. Now, go back to 62. That is incredibly courageous. It was like 10 years after we just received the right to vote or run, and just 1 year after we received the right to vote in federal elections. And after decades of a very patriarchal colonial system, these women like Mary Puro, and there's many others in New Brunswick and so forth, Rachel Marshall, my grandmother, Rita Smith, they were the forerunners. So I've been doing a lot of reflection on that. And I think it's those women who I stand on their shoulders that gave me the courage at that time to run for chief. And it wasn't easy because we didn't only have the patriarchal system in our system. I was dealing with a lot of non-Mi'kmaq fishermen. And I do remember distinctly walking into a room, and I had my counselor, Rob McEwen, who's a grandson of the late Richard McEwen, who was chief for many years. And I asked the fishermen where the women were, and they told me they were home where they should be. So that was the context. And so that's how I started. And it was really, when we say Indian Act, that's the programs and services that we provide through the federal government, provincial governments, if you will. But really, there's a lot more that a chief undertakes in terms of trying to advocate for our treaty rights, our Aboriginal rights, and so forth. And that was the mode that I was in, although I found it very difficult at the time because sometimes you felt like a federal employee, but at the same token here, we were trying to assert our treaty rights. Community was at a juncture, of course, and of course we were in the midst of a lot of pressure. But just to even go back a few years before that, when I first came on council, we were struggling then with Department of Fisheries and Oceans with the food fishery agreements. They were being imposed upon us. And back in those days, like we're looking about 1997, just a couple of years before Marshall, where DFO officers would come into the band office and drop off tags and refuse to leave. So this was the type of environment. And then we win this commercial right, but we wouldn't sign these commercial fishery agreements and so forth. And so I was a little bit worried. Frank had did a lot of legwork during those times. He fought hard to protect our treaty rights. He didn't agree with the food fishery agreements. And of course, we weren't going to agree with the commercial fishery agreements. In hindsight, yeah, I think we were trying to help each other out, but politics it was so critical at the time. It was a confusing, chaotic time for the community. Which way do we go? You have all this pressure to sign those agreements, and we just had to find other avenues. And what we chose to do, I would say, even in Frank's time and my time, and we try to continue to do, I would say, even with our current chief and council, Chief Carroll, and the council, is what are the Mi'kmaq concepts? How would they implement this? Even though it's a commercial right, how would we implement this from a Mi'kmaq perspective? And unfortunately, at that time, there was no room for alternative visions. It was either you assimilate into the commercial fishery as it was, or that was it. Initially, it was Bear River First Nation, Bucknakeg, formerly known as Afton, and Suspenagony. Chief Reg Maloney, he didn't really agree with those agreements. And when the council ultimately decided to go into the commercial fishery, he said, well, if you're going to do this, at least have a lawyer there. So for the longest time, there was 3 communities, and then eventually Suspenagony signed on, and then there was the 2 remaining communities. We're commercial fishing, but we're trying to figure out a way to do it that it sustains livelihoods. We still have to assert, and the community or the chief and council get a hold of me every so often, that, listen, you can impose what you want upon us, but we want it on record that we do not. This is, this is not an agreement with your system. We're doing what we have to do to provide a livelihood, to provide our food, but this does not mean that we agree with the federal system.
Yeah.
I had people ask me, to run. It was a chaotic time, and ironically, though, it's a very patriarchal system. But in my own community, I didn't feel that.
No.
Isn't that a strange thing? I felt really encouraged by the young men in my community, and I still do. I feel that they want my advice, they respect my advice, and so forth. It's only until you have to engage with those other departments, federal departments, or in those larger contexts of where there's a majority of male chiefs that you start to really feel the misogyny, if you will. We didn't call it that at the time, but now that I reflect on some of the statements that were made, or being I and a few other women chiefs, we'd be shut down very quickly, or we would be the last to speak, and so forth. Thank heavens for elders, because I did have, I know with the Atlantic Policy Congress of Chiefs, we had Margaret Lubelwa as an elder, who was a former chief. There was a Tremblay, an elder, and I remember I would sit by them, and they guided me so wonderfully. I sat by them because I was so angry at a lot of stuff at those days, with particularly the way meetings were conducted and when federal ministers would come in and so forth, and try to say, okay, well, I'm going to sit so these elders will ground me. Well, those two would say, Sherry, you got to get up and you got to say this, particularly when it came to health issues. You gotta get up. So they were warriors more so than I was in a lot of ways. And so, but I don't know what the actual moment was.
Okay.
And of course, you do these things, and I don't think I half expected to win. And when I did, I was so shocked. And I remember my cousin telling me, he said, well, you better pull up your socks and get to work. Stop worrying about how or what. And so yeah. So that's how I've got into that. I was fortunate to have Dawn McEwen, who is the granddaughter of Richard McEwen, and Steve Muse. And whereas before, even as a council member, we had such a small council, I was the only female all the time. You know what I'm saying? So it was kind of interesting being chief and having Dawn by my side as that. And then there was a full chief and council, female chief and council that came after. I even was threatened with third-party management. And for those folks who don't know what third-party management is, you have to fall into a deficit, and if you fall into a deficit with your expenses and running the community, the feds will come in and basically take over. Well, I wasn't in deficit, as I refused to implement some of their policies that I thought was inequitable. Yes, there was a big difference. The way that I operated, I would like to think, and maybe sometimes I wish I was a little bit more disciplined, but having worked for the council for a number of years, I was trying to motivate people to take their programs and develop solutions from the ground up. It didn't have to come from the chief and council, to give them a little bit more freedom with their budgets, how they did things. And that's a big move. And in hindsight, perhaps we should have did a little bit of capacity building, because all of a sudden they didn't have to run to the chief and council. Like, I was the type of chief, if it was covered in your policy, don't bug us. We have bigger fish to fry. You know, that was and so I think there was a difference that way. We did have a cultural center up and running for a bit. And well, I'm thinking as counselor too now, even prior to becoming chief, we worked very hard to get the health center up and running. And also, but as chief, we did this commercial right, but we wouldn't sign these commercial fishery agreements and so forth. And so I was a little bit worried. Frank had did a lot of legwork during those times. He fought hard to protect our treaty rights. He didn't agree with the food fishery agreements. And of course, we weren't going to agree with the commercial fishery agreements. But you're absolutely right. In hindsight, yeah, I think we were trying to help each other out, but politics it was so critical at the time. It was a confusing, chaotic time for the community. Which way do we go? You have all this pressure sign those agreements, and we just had to find other avenues, and what we chose to do, I would say, even in Frank's time and my time, and we try to continue to do, I would say, even with our current chief and council, Chief Carroll, and the council, is what are the Mi'kmaq concepts? How would they implement this? Even though it's a commercial right, how would we implement this from a Mi'kmaq perspective? And unfortunately, at that time, and there was no room for alternative visions. It was either you assimilate into the commercial fishery as it was, or that was it. Station of the fisheries is so much now that there's very few independent fleets left. And I wish that we had went a little bit further, because the fundamental difference for us, and I remember Chief Debbie Robinson, who was chief when I'd come on, and I think Chief Andrea Paul and I became chief at the same time, and of course Chief Andrea Paul is still there, and now we have Chief Annie as well, who's such a wonderful advocate for Indigenous women's rights. But I remember Chief Debbie Robinson trying to tell folks, we have to live here. Our kids go to school with non-natives. Our kids go to school with non-Indigenous folks, or some of these fishermen's children. And so we had to find that peaceful resolution. And it was quite, so we started a lot of the legwork on that.
I'd like to thank Dr. Sherry Picto. She wanted to tell her colleagues that are on the panel how much she's going to miss being here with you, and that she really wished she could have been. So I'd love to invite a colleague and a friend of mine, and someone who I've really been inspired by, looking at what she's done as a leader, and of course all of the other work. I always said all of the work that Chief Candace did prior to becoming chief informed her about all areas of band management, and obviously gave her an insight when she did take over. And boy, when you took over, I don't know if you built it yourself, but the beautiful mall went up, and beautiful things happened in that only reserve with a fence around it, St. Mary's. So, Chief Candace?
Well, thank you for the warm introduction. I'm honored to be in company of such great women, and Sherry just is an amazing individual. So where do I begin? Like Kathy said, that I started working as a very young 18-year-old in my community at the lowest level, receptionist, and worked my way up, and I was eager and hungry to learn, and even more hungry to help my people, even in that role. So I was fortunate enough to earn and move up, and I can say proudly on my own merit. We all know about jobs being given and stuff like that, but I worked hard and I fought hard, and I continue to do that. So I did, run for council. That was my first, I thought I could do more in the positions that I were in, like the band manager, the health director. St. Mary's was the first band in, the second band in Atlantic Canada that took on health transfer. And so I thought I could do much more. I wasn't handcuffed to being a politician. And but people were after me to run. as a counselor. So I did, and enjoyed that. But so I was there for a few years, and I worked with some great leaders in our community. The late Chief Harold Sapir, Elsie Paul. They were great mentors for me. And the chief at that time was Chief Arthur Bear, and he had been there for about 8 to 10 years, and it was taking a wear on his health. And he approached me and asked me if I would run, and I said, are you crazy? But he said, no, could you please run? And so I did. And the day of the nomination, he appeared in my doorway, and he said, I have some good news and I have some bad news. Um, the bad news is they won't let me step down. I have to run. But the good news is one of us are going to win. And so I did lose that year in 2002 by a very slight margin, and was devastated, and licked my wounds and got back up, and continued to work in the job I was holding then, was health director. But I saw the toll that it took on him, and he was declining very fast. So in 2004, I was successful, and I think one of the most things I'm proud of is being the first woman leader in my community elected. And I remember the next day and saying, "Oh my gosh, what did I do? Like, what did I get myself into?" But I knew what type of leader I wanted to be, and I knew our people deserved that type of leadership. They didn't know it, or maybe they never had that type of leadership. So I was met with a lot of resistance from people who were maybe benefiting from the old school politics. With there might have been policies, but people weren't following the policies, and to me that was just unfair. And so my first thing was to set up an HR, and to really look at policies and work with staff to make them that they were that people could agree to them. And so, like I say, met a lot of resistance, but it was probably one of the best moves that we made. And that took a long time to get people on board. But I think when people started thinking that it was fair, then they started to buy in. So many things. Uh, Kathy talks about the big green fence around the community, and that came with a lot of baggage. Also, is the relationship. Even though we're an urban community, the um, the members of Fredericton really didn't know who we were, and we didn't know them, or what we did know, it wasn't good. And so trying to build a relationship on to eliminating the myths. We weren't drunken, or we weren't lazy. We wanted to we didn't want handouts, and we were proud people, and we wanted to show them how proud we were. And so I think that was important to build on our economic development, to have our mall, for people to come to us, to have one of the biggest bingos in entertainment centers in Atlantic Canada. you know we wanted to show our pride, and with our powwow. So that was very important to me too. But also important was housing. We were building and bringing in all this revenue, but we were very behind in our housing. So I had made a commitment to council and said, let's make a plan, 60 homes in 5 years. Well, we exceeded that. We probably built close to 80 homes in 5 years. It's important, I find, for people to not only feel good about themselves by working or whatever, building on their gifts that they had, but also to have, safe, um, good quality homes, so that they could bring their children up and be proud of where they live. Um, some of the things that, maybe aren't so warm and fuzzy was, that there was, like anything, corruption, or, I just felt that, you know, our people weren't hearing, things were being decided, and our people weren't hearing from their leaders. And I was elected to the Atlantic Policy Congress. There was the Assembly of New Brunswick Chiefs, and shale gas was coming out, fracking was coming out. For me, life changing to me personally was Idle No More. And Chief Teresa Spence in Ottawa. Um, I went on a bus. I organized a busload of people, and we went up and spent New Year's Eve there. And it was that we needed to hear the people, and we needed to. That's where the power came from, the people. You know, I think we get away from leaders get away from the what is a leader? I'm a servant. I'm to serve the people. People are not to serve me. And I think, sometimes we get away from that as elected leaders in our communities. And I can understand why. Sometimes I think that people give them too much power, like to put them on a pedestal. To me, respect is earned, and it's not just given. So to me, that I can see how people can take that and run with that. But I've always, believed in the seven sacred teachings. I think that, honesty, courage, love, wisdom, truth, humility is how I live my life. But I wasn't popular by my fellow leaders, my fellow. I was popular with the grassroots people, our members. I was popular. I was proud to be called a people's chief. I wasn't in there for to earn brownie points with other leaders. That's. It took me a little while. I was new, and it took me a little while to say, no, I have a voice. I need to speak. It doesn't feel good, to go along with that. So I need to speak, and I need to speak up. And, um, I still think that, I may have been labeled from other leaders as, trouble, but, or, but that's on them and not on me. So, um, and I had to step down from the Atlantic Policy Congress, because I felt that they weren't listening to the people. And the people are the ones who elected us in there. And so I stepped down, and, no regrets, uh, no regrets in my life at all, um, because I think it's all about learning. It's all about learning. Being a leader in an Indigenous community is not an easy role. Being a woman leader is definitely even harder. I find that, with there's so much uh, lateral violence, there's so much competition, there is so much, and I'm not just saying in First Nations, it's everywhere, but that's what I know. Um, but there's also a lot of things that are rewarding, like elders or seniors who share their comments with me. I always felt it was important to not only be there in the good times, but also to be there in the bad times. I felt it was important that there's nothing that I would ask someone to do that I wouldn't do. And I think that, you know, we need to remember who we are, where we come from, and the people that we serve. Um, um, it is, you need to balance it also. I gave 150%. And some things, personal may have suffered because of that. So if I was giving recommendation to anyone, is to remain balanced, but always remain truth to yourself, and to speak your truth as hard as it is, just to remain true to yourself. Anyway, thank you, Wiliwin, all my relations.
Thank you, Walalan. Walalio. How do we say it in Willistok?
Wiliwin,
Wili-
Wiliwin.
Wiliwin and Walalan.
Hmm.
I love listening to you, and thank you for being the leader you have been and continue to be. Whew. Well, that's two heavy hitters. Now we're going on to this mighty leader of Pictou Landing, Chief Andrea Paul, Sagamo Andrea Paul. Are you there? There she is.
I am here, mighty. So thank you, Kathy. I just wanted to acknowledge our previous speakers, and they definitely are superb leaders. I am so happy that I get to work with District Chief Sherry. I think that, we're very lucky to have her, and for her to be the first female district chief was such an honor for me, even as a woman, to see that happen. And also to Chief Candace. I got to work closely with Chief Candace in the health file. So always think about Chief Candace, and then the role that she had with ISK. So, I'm really glad that you were here today and to speak your truth. So a little bit about myself. So I am, I like to be busy, and I'm actually beaten. I'm a multitasker, so I was beaten and listening at the same time. And when I was thinking about, what is it that I want to share at this, and I think that one of the things that I do want to say is that women are so freaking amazing. Like, for reals, like, women just get stuff done. And it was so funny because today at the office, we were all sitting in the lobby of the band office, the women, and we get it, and we were talking, and we really do get a lot of things done. Not saying that the men don't. But I just think that we come with that different mindset. We are mothers, we are nurturers, and sometimes, when you're sitting back and you're in a meeting and you're listening to the conversation, you can definitely see that the women come from a different perspective. I've been blessed to say that I've had a lot of women leaders in my life, a lot of women role models in my life. That have definitely helped shape who I am, the values that they teach. Like my grandmother, she was in a wheelchair, she had arthritis, and she literally was the strongest woman I know. Like, when you went into Gaju's house, like, Gaju was boss, and she'd tell you what to do and you did it. And so So, so you learn that very young, right? Or she would tell you, go check on so-and-so, see if they need any help. So you'd go and do it. And so you're taught those skills. And for me, that gave me a lot of teachings growing up. She was also strong in our language. You weren't allowed to speak English in her home. And so it's kind of too bad that my mother didn't kind of follow in those footsteps. She didn't like make us speak Mi'kmaq. She was pretty comfortable with us all speaking English. And so, I had my mom, I had my aunt, Mary Ellen, that I lived with, very strong woman. She raised a bunch of kids by herself while she worked, and she always made sure that we were active and doing things. And, I don't know how she did it. The one thing that I really liked about living with Mary Ellen, so I was in foster care when I was 12. And one of the things I liked when I lived with her is she was an early bird. So you'd be like laying in bed and Molly would be up at 6 a.m. and she's got the radio on. Back then, I think it was like CKEC. And she's doing laundry and she's smoking her cigarette in the kitchen. But, that kind of taught you about you get up early, get your stuff done, right? Because you have a busy day ahead of you. So those are some of the values that she taught. And so growing up, did I always want to be a chief? Probably not. It wasn't until I got much older. I went into the education field. I think not on purpose. So when I went to university and I started in 1989, I was, that was the first time I really dealt with racism. Growing up, there was that touch of racism. It wasn't as direct, it was indirect. But when I got to university, it was it was in my face racism, and it was brutal. And so for 3 years of dealing with that racism, and it was always from men. I don't know why. Maybe women, they were doing it, but I just didn't notice because the men were so in my face about it, like the things that they did. They were physical, they were mouthy. And so after my third year, I had decided, you know what, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to do this anymore. So I quit. And that summer, a job opened up in my community to be an education counselor. And I was like, well, I'll apply, right? And I was the only one that applied, so they gave me the job. They asked me if I wanted it. I had no idea what I was supposed to do, but I took it. I was like, yes, I get a paycheck. So I took it. And so I did that for a number of years. I actually went to Ontario and did a counseling program at the Ontario Native Education Counseling Association. Did that for 3 summers. And continued to work in my community with students and with parents, and did a lot of nice activities and really connected with students and the parents. And then I was like, geez, I gotta finish this degree. I said, so in my head, I felt like such a fake. I was like telling all these kids, you gotta stay in school, you gotta do this. And I'm like, raw, I didn't even finish my degree. So I was like, I got to go back to school, and decided to finish my undergraduate. And I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I was in my mid 30s by then. And in the mid 2000s, I was a counselor for a few years and did that and really enjoyed it. And that's when I think politics became an interest. I loved going to meetings and sitting around the table and hearing the conversation and learning, what's happening and what is it that you can contribute. And so I did. I didn't run for council in 2009 because I had gone back to get my BEd degree. And so I took a 2-year break, and then in 2011, I was actually teaching, and I decided I actually took a program at the why can't I think of it? But at St. FX. And it was a program on Saturdays, which I hated because my girls played hockey. And so I always felt so guilty going to this class. And one of the things that we had to talk about was our short-term and long-term goals. And I remember sitting there and I was doing a lot of teaching about First Nations. They had no clue about how First Nations communities work. And so I was doing a lot of that, I guess, advocacy work that I didn't even realize that they didn't know about, right? And so then when we were talking about our short-term and long-term goals, like I wrote one of my long-term goals was, I'd like to be a chief one day. And who would have known? So I ended up quitting that program because I felt so guilty not being able to take my kids to hockey. So I said, I can't do this. I said, my kids come first always. So I quit the program and finished my BED and all this. And then I was teaching at Pictou Landon School. And I said, you know what? I think I want to run. And so I had to campaign really hard because people had always seen me in this educational lens. And so I had to go and really talk to people about why I was interested. And those conversations were so great. And I was learning more as I was talking to people. And I would tell people, I'm not going to promise you anything because I'm not going to do that. The only thing I can promise you is I'm going to work really hard every single day. I promise you, I will work hard and I will listen. And, I didn't go with big promises of I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. Okay, sure. Sorry, my husband's going to make me something to eat. So, anyways, and I won that first election by 9 votes. And it was against someone I really respected and loved. And so it was Roddy, District Chief Roddy Francis. So we were neck and neck. And I ended up winning that election by 9 votes. And we talked about it all the time. And so I was lucky that we always had women chief in my community for such a long time. Like there was Chief Eileen Francis, and then before that it was Chief Anne Francis Muse. So there was always women in politics. So I always had that to look up to. And so I would say that there were many challenges when I took on the role. And one of the first things that I noticed was the respect not given to women as leadership, as chiefs. So I remember I'd be like, you're standing there with the, you're being introduced to the government people and all these, dignitaries and stuff. And then they'd be like, hi, chief, all these men, hi, chief, hi, chief, hi, chief. And then they walk right by me. And I'd be like, I'm a chief, right? So that really bothered me, right? How women were treated as chiefs. Mind you, Chief Debbie wasn't because she'd been in the picture for such a long time. And so I remember one of the things that I wanted to do was I put out a thing on Facebook and I said, how come women chief don't wear headdresses? And then everybody came back with, oh, the women wear the peaks. And I said, exactly, the women wear the peaks. But why don't the women chiefs wear a headdress? And anyways, I said, you know what? I want a headdress. So my husband got me a headdress. We found somebody that could make me a headdress. And I remember when I got it and how proud I was. But it was so crazy that I was so scared to wear this because I was a woman. Even though I was a chief, I was scared to put this headdress on because Chief Debbie didn't even wear a headdress. She wore the peaked cap. So the first time I decided to wear it was at St. Anne de Beaupré in Quebec, because I said, nobody can get mad at me if I'm at church. So I remember being in the line and Julian was behind me. And I said, Julian, I have a headdress. Should I wear it? And she looked at me and she goes, absolutely, put it on. So she helped me put my headdress on. And I remember we're marching in because all the chiefs and the grand council, they all kind of walk in together at St. Dan to boat parade. And I remember my heart was beating so hard because I was like, I just don't want to be disrespectful. I don't want people to be upset. And at the same time, I'm saying, I'm at church, so they really can't get mad at me right now. So I wore it, and it was such an incredible and empowering feeling, because when I was going through, and the women that were looking, and they were like, oh my God, like, and so I had so many women after the service come and talk to me, and it made me feel validated as a leader by other women. And I thought, that's so incredible. Like that, I, you get that respect from men, but to get it from the women was just, it felt so good. And people were like, can I get my picture with you? And I was like, oh my God, I felt like a model. No, just kidding. But it was, it just, you need that, right? And so throughout the years of being a chief, you pick up some skills, and you learn new things. And one of the things that that I also, of course, had to deal with was the pulp and paper industry. And that was quite the battle, and it didn't come easy, and there was a lot of racism with that. And I was saying so in 2019, December 20th, 2019 is when the premier made the announcement that he was not offering an extension. And I remember that morning, I woke up, prayed, I cried, because I said, it didn't matter whatever decision he was going to announce that day, it was going to be super hard for whoever, right? And I remember after he gave his announcement, I couldn't even listen. We were all in the council chambers holding hands, and we had him on the TV, and we're watching him. And as soon as he started talking, I knew he was going to honor his decision, honor the act. And so after he had talked about it, after he announced it, I hugged everybody in the room, and then I went to my office, and I was like just bawling my eyes out in my red shirt. And Heather had come in, and she's like, oh, Chief, I know this is just, this is great for Pictou land. And then I remember I looked at her and I said, no, Heather. And I said, I'm scared that somebody's going to kill me. That was my reality at that moment. People lost jobs. And so that was the first time in my life that I ever felt that kind of fear. And so there was a bunch of media people there, and they wanted to talk, and I was like, oh no, I looked at Heather, I said, I can't. I said, I have to go see the kids. So I remember leaving the office, and I ran down to the school, like running, and the school kids weren't there. They were all at a event or something, swimming, or because it was like the last day of school. And I was like, there's no kids here. And then to this day, I still can't even remember who that woman was that I was talking to outside the school. And then she said, no, but the daycare kids are here. And I said, perfect. So I went to the daycare, and so I I remember kneeling down, and I was giving them hugs, and they were high-fiving me. They had no idea why they were high-fiving me. They're just babies, right? But it was so important for me to go and see children, because I needed to remember why we did the work that we did. I needed them to ground me. I needed their strength at that moment. And so it didn't get any easier. I had written something on social media that I wasn't proud of, but I was so angry. And throughout that whole process, there was one thing I did right, and it was up for 7 minutes, and then I deleted the post, and I said, sorry for my rant. And someone had saved it and decided that December 24th was a great time to release what I had written. And you could not even fathom the hate that came at me. I wrote one thing, and sorry, I wasn't going to cry, but the amount of hate and the amount of threats, it was so unreal. And it literally got me to a point where I was immobilized. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything by myself. And I never, ever felt that kind of fear before in my life. Never. And I remember when the premier called me and I apologized to him for what I had written. And he said, Andrea, he said, for everything that you had gone through, and that was all you wrote, that's nothing. He said, and it made me feel good. I spoke to the minister, Mark Miller. I was just, and I didn't tell people in my community what I was going through, because you're a leader. So you have to be really strong. So you kind of just go through it. And the only ones that really knew were my family. And so the first month, I didn't go anywhere. In January, I called into my meetings because I said, there's no way I can get on that highway. I was so terrified. My work put in cameras in my car because they said, if anything is to happen, at least we'll have the cameras to look at. That's not a good feeling. But I did take the cameras out 2 Decembers ago. And I switched out my car though. And one of the things I was going to do was change my plate. So as leaders, one of the great things that we did was the Mi'kmaq license plate. Something I was really proud of that we had that was ours. But I had a Mi'kmaq license plate. So when I went to the car dealer, I said, I want to take the plate off. I want you to give me a new plate so I won't be recognizable in my car. So they pretty much said, okay, come back tomorrow. And so the next day I went back and they said, are you sure that you want to do this? And I said, yeah, I'm sure. I don't want that Mi'kmaq plate on my car. And then they left. And then I was there with my husband. And I said, you know what? No, I'm not getting rid of my plate. I'm not allowing anyone to take anything else away from me. They're not taking this plate away from me. They've done enough. They're not taking this away from me. So I left my plate on and I felt, and my cameras are actually still at the dealers. They're like, your cameras are still here. I'm like, it's almost like a trauma trigger. And I'm like, yeah, I'll pick them up. But I never pick them up because I'm like, I don't want to be reminded of that fear. And that's the reality of leadership. When you take a stand against something, it can be difficult, but it's so rewarding too at the same time. And so, when I'm listening to Sherry and I'm listening to Chief Candace and, the things that they had gone through, they're not easy. And what I'd gone through, of course, was not easy, but it was literally the most rewarding thing because today we don't have to worry about the air that we're breathing. We have children that now can swim at our beach. There's people walking the beach every single day. The gifts that we get every day because that monster of a mill has shut down. We're just so blessed. And I'll continue to fight to make sure that mill does not, I'll do whatever I can in my power to make sure that mill doesn't reopen. I know I don't, we as the band don't have the money that they have to spend on all the crazy things that they do. But we will do that fight. And we have a lot of allies that are there to help and support us through that process. So that's, I guess, what I'm going to end with, because I know I talked too long. And sorry for getting emotional. I don't know why I did that, but
no apologies.
So thank you. And, you know, I really appreciated having the chance to share my truth.
Well, Chief Andrea, I have enjoyed every second of your journey. It's just been fun and really and inspiring, and you have such a ball field of cheerleaders all the time, even if you don't know. But thank you so much for giving us our air back. Well, Alan, you know. Okay, woo. I want to remind everybody that you might have a question or two or a comment, and now's the time to start writing to us in our chat so we can try to entertain a few questions after our last speaker. And if you don't write anything, we're just going to let them have a conversation together. So at this point, not last but not least, or last but not least, is a good friend of many, many people who has really helped us to stand as women and protect all the people, and that's Meekamhan. So I'd like to ask Meekamhan to try to, you know, what do you call that? You know, try to beat that last one. No, try to be yourself here, Mig. Are you there, Mig, somewhere? There she is. What do you think of that, Andrea?
Oh my goodness. Kathy, thank you so much for cushioning me in in between all these wonderful, amazing women, Ebijik, Niganusk, women leaders. So I have to say that in listening to Sherry, Candace, and Andrea, you know, there's been many paths, and women have taken on many roles, the work and the responsibilities that's been neglected, you know, and in our lives, in our own homelands, and in this postage stamps communities that's been imposed on us when we would have been a unified clan systems. And so in opening with that, you know, I have to say that our lives, we've been really been part of our experience in our lives, and they've been really designed for us. And we talk about this in our own ancestral teachings, how the elders have guided everyone, you know, in our communities. And so for me, I feel like my path that was guided for me or co-created for me in my community was created by witnessing such trauma and such oppression and disempowerment to people that I love so much because of the federal policies, and when I became an older adult, and when I was younger, the provincial policies, you know, when the tripartite agreements began. But like I've known Candace and Sherry, and really looking forward to connecting with Chief Andrea as well. You know, this is just a wonderful organic and authenticity of our community. And so it feels good to always be working and sitting among our own people. And I think that's what being grounded truly to our own homeland, our motherland, has kept us in that space of truth, speaking our truth, and the power of our heritage, our history. And so that grounding our culture and our language is where we receive our identity. And so for me, I feel like I've taken, and I'm not strange to the federal Indian Act elections, and I was born into a very large family, and women, the Jagat clan, which is the lineage of metallic women, Martin, and Morris. This is all the maternal names of the women lineage that I come from. And so my education came from the fields, the blueberry fields, sitting among women, listening to conversations. This is how we held the statistics of our community. Our database was at the blueberry fields and knowing everyone's status and where the needs needed to flow, as the women talked about, as they took on leaderships that we have to work with in our communities. It's not like we have a choice. We are, and this is my. I continue to echo this out to wherever I go in hope that people get this, that we are Wabanaki, we are people of First Light, the Indigenous people of the land, and we are Longhouse people. Longhouse means communal. We work in a communal, and it's the Longhouse, it's the matriarchs that facilitate and they work in the Longhouse. They're the ones that structure that internal world of our nations. They are truly the heart and the backbone. And so that's what I'm describing is our own traditional governance, our own traditional way of how we structure ourselves as family and how we balance all that out with the way we design our economy, which was a shared base. Our political systems were founded on truth and was honored through eagle feather and wampum. And it was a place of that we all were aspired to, to work towards. Just as when we were young in this day and age, we go around our community and see where the needs are, and then we look for tools or position ourselves as women to fulfill those obligations and build our communities upward. And so it's pretty hard to do that when we've been governed by a foreign system that's very patriarchal, and that it's not structured to support family, and it's not. It wasn't designed for our nations to thrive and to be the true landlords of the land, And I don't know where that landlord comes from, but when I'm talking about stewards of the land, how we live rightfully with our sacred mother and all our relations. Our economy was based on maintaining balance with the animal and the plant world, the land, the waterways, all that. So that's been my focus, and I was born I'm reminded that I was born an activist. And one of my uncles was sharing in a public forum that he was saying that he could only remember me as a child always having a small baby in my arms on my hip, as young as 7-year-old, and just I was always a caretaker. We're born natural caretakers, and that were um, work work with women, working to build ourselves up to imprint and inspire our grandmothers. And so what I'm sharing is through the Indigenous lens, and I'm a strong advocate of our own traditional governance and our culture, our sovereign ways. So I gladly accepted um, the position, the responsibility to sit in a circle with the Gespegiag traditional council as a grandmother, and in the council they were still influenced very much. So I was be labeled or given the title of being a sub chief. But I want to share how my understanding of how our life is laid out. And so as a young girl actually, I had a very powerful dream, and I told my mother, and I didn't know about the women chiefs in Nova Scotia, in Unamagi. And so I had a dream, and my dream was that there will be a woman chief, and that her name was, I was told in my dream that this is her name. And so my European name, I didn't know my spirit name, so my European name, so I didn't even think that this is what I've been told or what I've witnessed was my future. And I thought as I got older, going to school. But before that, I was very fortunate to be born into two radical people that influenced me a lot. Was my mother from the Jagech clan, and my father from the Moose clan. And so both of them were pretty radical themselves. And so when they had all five of us, they didn't force us to go to church, or we didn't have to go to school, and that was pretty strict at that time. You had to go to church. And but the duration of that time, like all the hardships, the controls of the church onto the people, and the authorities, the RCMP, and of course at the time the Indian agents. So my parents traveled a lot to look for work over the border to U.S. and so on. And so my grandma died very young, and my grandfather raised us. So we had to run out of the woods. We had such a freedom of, not having to go to school or go to church. And our playground was we live on top of the bay. And so I would be considered probably a wild child, or in the 70s, we would have been probably called hippies, because nobody knew about Indian culture. And that so hippies was the most closest that you can relate to, people living close to the land and carefree. The carefreeness for sure paid the price, because my father wasn't able to provide for us. And so those times were hard, and he quickly, because of oppression and the loss of power, and he's unable to speak English. He was fluent in the language, and he was quickly went into this, I guess, isolation or abandonment. He had a place when he was younger, and then when he started getting older, he didn't have a place in the community, because the residential school students came back started coming back, which was good, but it was not good for some people because they couldn't speak English, and the church replaced most of the speakers and brought in the students that came in from the residential schools, and that they were much more greater allies to the Catholic Church and to the Indian agents and so on. So my father was quickly displaced, and so he became an alcoholic and died. And so I became pretty radical. You know, I started to make some changes, and as soon as I got old enough to vote in the Indian Act election, because I blamed them for the loss of my father's life. So I'm going to get in there and I'm going to make some changes. And so 19 years old, I was old enough to vote, but I was nominated and I came in as counsel as well. And it was because of that advocacy on my younger life, and I didn't remember this until when I came in as a counsel. And some of my old schoolmates reminded me, they said, well, this is where you belong. You've been fighting for our rights since you were in grade 7. You know, the big walkout because we were being treated unjustly by the teachers and all the what we're now dealing with Indian Day School loss, the settlement claims from physical abuse, mental, spiritual, and sexual abuse that we've all been subjected to. And so, yes, I've done a lot of organizing at that grade 7 and 8. And there was a high pregnancy rate at that time as well in the 70s. There was many young girls, 13, 14, 15, and they were getting pregnant. And so I had organized a rally outside in front of the band office for the young students, and I started to encourage them to get access to birth control. And with research, I located a doctor that would prescribe birth controls to women, young underage, you know, because many of us was getting pregnant. And so, yeah, so those were, it's as one of my sisters had shared, it's not something that you plan to do, but you take on, you pick up where the work is needed. And so those were the areas that, I took on. And but as soon as I got elected, 19 years old, unable to speak English, I wasn't a fluent speaker, very, just barely, just a survival way of understanding English. But I do remember our first day to be officially be representatives in the Indian Act. There was I'm not sure the name that they had, but it was one of the directors at the local Indian Affairs who came down with, I think there was 3 men that came into our community to welcome the chief's new appointment and the new council, and then especially with the new council, because we were instantly reminded that what our jurisdiction was, and that we were not able to speak about anything else outside Indian Act policy, and that the chief was reminded that that he makes the decision now, that his people had voted him to make all the decisions, and the council, And I was just, I was so disappointed, you know. So what I did not stay. I didn't really offer, and I left. And at the time, I started to go back to. I went back to school, upgrading course, and then I went to took on a course at Cody Institute, and I became a addictions counselor, like many of us did. And it was there where I first experienced pipe ceremony and the truth of who I am as a Mi'kmaq woman. And I fell in love with this elder, Nul Nakut. And I experienced the pipe ceremony, and when he talked about who we are as a people, our history, our language, and sharing that we had a structure, we had a governance system, and elders and women were respected, and children were the center of our lives. And I just that was the pivotal moment in my life. My spirit was totally present, and I first time ever felt fed with something, fed with truth. And I admired him because I know what it takes to speak the truth at those times. And as you heard the sisters here, Andrea, what she went through, and it was during after two for me with the vision crisis that, and my activism in the community, that my two brothers, who were my greatest protectors and supporters, asked me to pull back and to leave. Just to pull back and protect myself, because they could not be on watch 24/7 to watch me, and that they were afraid that they might find me somewhere in the roadside. And they said that I was getting too strong in protecting our sovereign rights and talking about our culture and history and who we are. And so that not only intimidated the communities around us, but the ones who were benefiting the patriarchal systems, and how quickly to see how these poverty-stricken reserves, not all, but most, my community, we were poverty-stricken, but it's hard to believe that several millionaires were built in a poverty-stricken community. And those were the things that I was speaking up against and standing up against, and that's what I had to protect myself, and I did have to leave, and I'm very fortunate that my Penobscot family took me in, and I lived in Penobscot territory, homeland, for 10, 12 years. And so this is how still our kinship is. You know, you were there for each other. And today, from that experience, I know I've got 2 minutes, but I just want to go back quickly to my opening, where our lives are already predestined, and how our elders had helped to nurture that, because the stories that I wasn't sitting in the circle, but I was invited to be part in the blueberry fields and listening to the stories. And so I was being groomed, and that's the traditional knowledge. It's not about one-to-one like this, but being exposed and part in the circle. And so you take on by nature, because you know everyone is doing their part to care for family, to care for community, to care for respond to nation. And so women are the central part of our in our matricultural systems. Women have the pulse on our family, in our community and in our nations. And so I am very, take it very strongly, my role as a Sahamo Abohonmuet, Nujia Abohonmuet in the Gespegiai Traditional District Council. And I want it with, and hopefully people will begin to ask about our own traditional systems, because they've been made to be invisible, but we are working towards bringing them, making them visible. And because they're invisible, because women are the center and they're the leaders in those longhouses. Thank you so much. Wilalio.
Thank you, Lalan. Yeah. Okay, so that's a low. I don't even know if anybody has a word to say after all that, but I'm supposed to find out if there are any questions. And I think Riel and Teresa are going to pull them forward. In the meantime, if questions come up, I'm sure someone's going to show them to me. I'd like to thank all of you myself for it's just made me feel stronger tonight to hear from all of you, and just to be part of that. The train ride we've been on has been great, and I just want to know if any of you have comments to make to each other about what you heard. I mean, you've said some things about each other in your talks, but anything you were thinking about?
Well, I've been meaning to share this with Candace. I've been to many earlier part of my life. I've attended many of the conferences with APC. It's Atlantic Policy, chiefs of it in the Atlantic. And I've always, when you came on as the chief, and when you started to come to those assemblies, you brought a genuine leadership and impacted. There might have been some leaders who had other agendas or focus, but there was such a great respect for you, and I wanted to always share that. I think I might have shared that in one of the rallies, but I just want to say that and here, because it's you've been a very strong role model for me. Thank you. Akelu Tandeliu Deskun, Andrea. I'm so glad to have met you, and I look forward to our paths crossing.
Thank you, Mikmahan. I also have always had so much respect and admiration for you, and how you stand truth to who you are, and when the definition of an elder comes up, I always say Migmahan is, she's never judged me. I never hear her say a bad word about gossip or any, she speaks her truth. I have so much respect and admiration for you, and it's it's just an honor to be on the panel with you tonight, and I admire the work that you're doing. And Chief Andrea is, it's always a pleasure. I heard the pain, and that you carried, but the work that you've done, for your community, for your people, is just, it's just amazing, amazing to stand up to industry, this little tiny powerhouse of a woman, and and to stand. And I know I see you among other male leaders, and I know just the respect that you don't receive, but know that many women and many young girls are looking to you as a role model. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
good to know.
Yeah. I think we have to give you a little voice there, little Andrea.
Thank you both. And Migmahan, I look forward to meeting you too. I never knew who you were until today. Yes, when was it when we met? 2 days ago or yesterday? So I'm really, really happy that our paths have crossed, and I really enjoyed listening to everything that you were sharing. And I really love when I hear those teachings, because I think it's the teachings that ground us a lot too, right? So, and when you're talking about how young you were, and then advocating for support so that young people don't get pregnant, I thought, geez, that's so amazing. Like, who would even think of that at a young age, right? To do that kind of advocacy work. But I was like sitting here going, yeah, that's really cool. That's pretty tough of her back then to do that. So I do hope that we get to meet one day. And Chief Candace, oh my God, I just got to say, I miss hanging out. We had so much fun, and I always admired our work. Well, your work definitely. Chief Candace is a multitasker. I just got to say, we would be at health partnership meetings, and she was co-chair, and she would be co-chairing this meeting, answering her emails, replying to text, and then she would still be paying attention to everything that we're doing and keeping us on task. And I'm like, I don't know how she does it. Incredible. So yeah, so I've been really lucky to have so many great women cross my path, and and they're all gifts, is how I see it. So thank you so much for the kindness.
Yeah. So I wondered if any of you thought about what's the greatest success. I mean, we've heard the successes in all of the different ones that you've had, but if you just think of something right off the bat, what's something that comes right to your mind as one of what you feel is one of your great successes, besides having your children? That's a given. We know that. Anybody want to try that one?
For me,
Greg?
tell you what my greatest success is: my sobriety. I've really been proud of that. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had issues with addictions, and I drank a lot. And one of the things my mom always begged me, because my dad died in 2008, and my mom always said, "Oh, I wish you wouldn't drink." But I loved to drink. Might not have always been the nicest person when I drank. No, just kidding. I wasn't a mean drunk. But I think being sober and not drinking has been my greatest success, and I'm really proud of that. So I'm going on 4 years, and I talk like I was an alcoholic, but I wasn't. But well, maybe I was. I don't know. I like to drink on Saturday nights, so so not drinking. 4 years on June 5th or June 6th is coming up. So pretty proud. My husband quit drinking too, and my daughter, she quit drinking at 27, and her partner quit drinking, and my little one hardly ever drinks. She's 24, so that makes me proud. Yeah, so sobriety makes me very, very proud, and I'm glad I finally got to achieve it. And although my mom's no longer with me, I know that she's super proud.
Yes, and she also achieved some sobriety in her later years.
Yes.
Yeah. Very much. Very tough. Yeah.
Mm.
Candace or Mig?
I think for my greatest success would be I was a troubled teenager. Got into some bad, stuff. But I got pregnant at a very young age, 18, and I vowed that I would not drink. My son will be 45 this year, so it's been 45 years without alcohol. Yeah. And yeah. And I try to talk to people is that just never give up on yourself for whatever it could be a bad day, but it's only a bad day. It's not a bad life. So never, ever. And if you dream, you can achieve it. Just keep, somebody wrote in my yearbook that where you see yourself, where do you see people in this? And people wrote in my yearbook, I see her in jail. I see her in this. I see her, overdose or stuff like that. And so, I'm proud of the person that I've become and, um, yeah, proud of that's my own personal.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Mig? Anything, Mig?
Okay. I'm just thinking about success. Oh my goodness. I think how I measure success is I've found my way and I sit in such great councils, and in these councils, it's really broadened my worldview and that people are talking now. The next generation are talking about that their desire to learn their language, their culture, and and to have sat among people like I could just start mentioning names like Maggie, Paul, Deanna, Alma, Shirley Bear, it just goes on and
Margaret
Margaret, that's the measure of success of being in council with them, and just these are our this is our future and of the women who have made us who we are today. And so I'm really proud to be among the circle and have known these experiences with them. That's a big when we talk about our sobriety, this is all part woven into it too. It's because of our culture and it's because of women who are there and created those spaces for us we've aspired to, and sobriety and everything else comes with all that, because that's what we give. We don't put those aside to commit to a life for our people, for our children.
Well, thank you. Those were really nice messages to leave with a lot of us that are listening. I'd like to now ask Vice Provost Teresa Ray-Jack-Talley to come back. There she is, and take it from here.
Thank you, Kathy. On behalf of all the participants in this forum, I'd like to thank the panel of Indigenous chiefs and leaders in the comment section, there were a lot of people who were thank you for sharing and inspiring them. Your presentation was inspiring and aspiring, healing and hopeful. We learned a lot, especially about the pain, the violence, the challenges that you overcame and continue to navigate, but also about the importance of the support you received from elders and children, other chiefs and community. So thank you, and thank you, Kathy, for doing a great job co-hosting, and for my Speak Truth to Power Forum for yet another outstanding production. I would like now to use this last few minutes to officially honor our Indigenous women chiefs and leaders by presenting each one of you with a Dalhousie Certificate of Recognition and Appreciation. Dr. Deep Saini, the president for Dalhousie University, was supposed to do this, and so he sent his deepest apologies for not being able to be present and to present you with this certificate awards and to personally thank you. But he's traveling on business and promises to view the recorded event. He also wanted me to express his sincere appreciation for you taking your valuable time from your very busy lives to share your experience, your knowledge, and your wisdom as women leaders in your communities. He imagines that these conversations are particularly important given our history of truth and reconciliation. So again, on behalf of President Saini, myself, the Speak Truth to Power Forum, and the wider Dalhousie community of faculty, staff, and students, I want to virtually present you with these certificates. They will be mailed out to you as soon as the forum is over, to thank you not only for participating on our forum, but for the leadership, the brave leadership that you have provided to the Indigenous community more broadly. Wilaliok.
Debbie Martin just popped up on the chat. Walalan to all of you for sharing your stories. You are an inspiration, and that's, I know that once again, Sherry told me to say she really wishes she was with all of you right now. And I think we need to have a larger gathering for a longer time, maybe in person soon. Women of First Light, Mi'kmaq and I are part of that. Anyone that wants, that's a Woman of First Light is a member, but we've been working on bringing back our teachings and have wonderful gatherings. And Sherry's been part of that, but she wanted to extend her thanks to all of you for supporting her. And I just remember one last thing she said, like there's so much more of her interview that we just, I just said, oh, you'll have to listen to it because it's wonderful. But I asked her, when did you, what was, she said there was a aha moment in her life when she was in Kenya and she had just gone through all kinds of awful things in her life and losses of her brothers. And she said she was in Kenya and at this World Fisheries Conference. And she said they're all from all different walks of life, from all Indigenous communities around the world, speaking about the water and the fish. And one of them said, well, we have to take care of all of our relatives because that's who we are. We have to take care of everybody, because if we don't take care of our relatives, who's going to take care of the fish? Who's going to take care of the trees? And that's our role. And it's also, he said, we're keepers, we're supposed to be caretakers of all life. And the people that are here today with us on our land are included in that, as well as the fish, but all people that are here. So I'm going to close it with I'm not sure which is coming my way, but it'll come up in a minute. Away your hay, away your hiya, hey yo, away yo, hey ya, hey ya. dawn she will rise o'er the setting sun, and she'll move the ocean tides with the power of her mind. A new dawn breaks o'er the horizon as night sky fades into the rising sun, and life she goes on as time heals our pain. Away, oh hey, away, oh hi, hey, oh. Away, oh hey, 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 away, oh hey, 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 away, oh hey, 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 away, oh hey, hey, Dalho. Okay, the drum is made by Eva Nicholas of Wagobah, just in case you were thinking about it. Yeah. So, Walalio, and thanks everybody out there for your lovely comments and for joining us. And let's hope we have a few more to do in the next while. Good night.